violence and discrimination of the members of it. Violence. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people frequently experience violence directed toward their sexuality or gender identity. This violence may be enacted by the state, as in laws prescribing punishment for homosexual acts, or by individuals. Widespread and systematic human rights violations on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, and homosexuality persist in the Philippines. Types of violence, and these are emotional violence, physical violence, and sexual violence.
When we see a purple ribbon on someone's chest or in a storefront, we know what it means. It's a universal sign of support for domestic violence victims. There's a lot of support out there for people who struggle with the unthinkable behind closed doors. But there are also people who suffer through this significantly more than others. No, not necessarily women, but the LGBTQ community. A branch of the CDC called the National Center for Injury Prevention and Control collected data on this issue. It created the National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey, which does something many other domestic violence statistics don't. Highlights homosexual, bisexual, and transgender people in its numbers. It found about 44% of lesbian women and about 61% of bisexual women have experienced rape, physical violence, or stalking by a partner. Compare that to only 35% of heterosexual women. The men's disparities aren't as drastic but still exist. 26% of gay men and about 37% of bisexual men have experienced rape, physical violence, or stalking by a partner. Compare that to 29% of heterosexual men. The survey also found transgender domestic abuse victims are more likely to experience violence in public. Breaking it down by types of violence, 20% of LGBTQ victims experience physical abuse, 15% have been verbally harassed, 11% reported violence involving a weapon, and 4% experienced sexual violence. Very few scholars have taken the time to dig into why this happens. Medical scientists at Northwestern University refer to something called the minority stress model. It says being part of a minority group contributes to high stress. The scholars at Northwestern say same-sex couples are dealing with the stress of being a sexual minority. One partner is physically taking their added stress out on another. Experts also use the double closet phenomenon as a contributing factor when discussing the topic with the BBC. They explained how some victims in same-sex relationships are reluctant to report abuse because they don't want to be outed by officials. As these trends become more widely known, assistance for victims is slowly but surely becoming more available. In the past few years, the Federal Violence Against Women Act expanded to assist everyone, regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity. The CDC says it's focused on preventing all intimate partner violence represented in its research, because the key to creating respectful, non-violent domestic relationships actually starts outside of the home, with friends, family, and communities, respecting just how serious
discrimination. With more than 5.5 million individuals living in the Philippines, it's important to recognize not only our progress in furthering equality efforts, but also the barriers people still face in fair and equal access to employment, housing, healthcare, and public accommodation. The legal definition of discrimination is the unequal treatment of persons on the basis of an identifying characteristic.
It's something we all have in common, but for some, the thing that makes them different, being gay, lesbian, bi, trans, or intersex, marks them out for abuse. According to surveys, between half and two-thirds of LGBT youth experience bullying in childhood, forcing 1 in 3 to skip or even drop out of school. Many LGBT adolescents are rejected by their parents and thrown out of the family home and end up living on the streets. Some 40% of homeless youth living on the streets of major U.S. cities identify as LGBT or queer. Bullying, isolation, and rejection leave deep scars. Gay and lesbian youth are up to 4 times more likely to contemplate suicide compared with their straight peers, while young trans people are almost 10 times more likely to have attempted suicide than the general population. Workplace discrimination is widespread. In a recent European survey, 1 in 5 LGBT people reported experiencing discrimination at work in the past year. Studies suggest rates of joblessness, poverty, food insecurity, and depression are all higher among members of the LGBT community. For the individuals in question, these are personal tragedies. For the wider community, they represent an enormous waste of human potential, of talent, of creativity, and productivity that weighs heavily on society and on the economy. A study that looked at 39 countries found a clear link between the marginalization of a country's LGBT community and a corresponding loss of potential economic output. The cost of homophobia and transphobia is simply colossal. From a shrunken labor force and a flight of talent to lost product, discrimination against lesbian, gay, bi, and trans people could be costing $1 billion a year. The drag on growth filters into lower tax receipts for the government, meaning less money for health, education, and other essential services. Homophobia and transphobia, both a human rights priority and a development imperative. This cycle can be broken. More and more countries and companies recognize the benefits that flow from tackling homophobia and transphobia. For companies, that might mean adopting new corporate policies to make the workplace safe, fair, and accepting for all LGBT people, and looking at their business practices up and down the supply chain for ways to reinforce anti-discrimination efforts. For countries, it means new laws and effective public education and